18 minutes to 8 o'clock. Arnold Sagawa here with you. Very good morning and welcome to Morning at NTV. Time to delve into what we should actually be looking forward to on this particular week as we do wind down the month. We're already halfway through 2020. Such a drastic year it has been. One of the highlights is, of course, the news that has come through that we will be having a quote-unquote scientific election. But what does this mean? More so, if at all, this scientific election is going to be driven primarily by social media campaigns, radio campaigns, TV campaigns. What does that mean in terms of financing? If you're a political aspirant out there, does this mean that you'll actually be spending more? All these questions, we do have a very interesting gentleman to help us unpack this and more. Many thanks for making time to speak to us, Mr. Henry Muguzi, who is the ED for Alliance for Campaign Finance Monitoring. Mr. Muguzi, thanks for making time to speak to us.
Thank you for having me.
It's a very contentious subject. On one hand, one might argue that if I'm not about to start printing thousands of posters, okay, maybe they might be needed. And I'm going to primarily rely on maybe social media and radio and TV campaigns. Give me a sense of the financial implications of that. Would it be a bit less, or is it actually going to pick up from 2016?
I think there's a kind of a silver lining on this. If you are going to be restricting your campaigns only on media, go down the path of radio, where possible television, newspapers, if they exist in your constituency and they are being read, social media, but also other forms of media such as outdoor advertising. Some of them may opt to raise what to call billboards, kind of temporary billboards, in every parish, if you like. So, but overall, you may discover that that will bring down significantly the cost of campaigns, because you see, normally what escalates spending is the contact between candidates and voters. That does escalate, and of course, then when they get in contact, then they get engaged in some form of spending war, and that escalates it. So, but on paper, I think, and realistically, we have made a calculation, and we think it could be much cheaper. Let me give you the numbers. We think that if you've gone down the path as the path described by the Electoral Commission, you are likely to spend in the region of 50 to 60 million. Whereas, if it were to be
that's for which post?
That's for a member of parliament, right? Okay, that's for member of parliament. Let me start with the president. If you are going to contest for president, of course the incumbent would also spend less. Okay, if he spent, upwards of what 100 billion last time, he has to tone it down. Okay, because then contact is also limited from the incumbent, because the incumbent spends a lot of money because there is contact. But for the other candidates, I think they're going to use more of national TV, because then that reaches out, and a lot of radio, and so you would see them spending in the region of what, about 100 billion.
That's for the presidential.
For the presidential.
And that's 100 billion as a lump sum.
Lump sum, that includes the team that does campaigning for you on the ground. You remunerate them. That includes the staff you hire. That includes the kind of advertising you're going to make, because as a president, you would want to have a billboard on these big outdoor advertisings in every major town, municipality, or city of this country. You would want to use TV. TV is going to be expensive, because you see, you're going to have to run maybe a minimum of 10 spot ads on NTV and other TVs. NTV would not charge you less, And so in about 90 days of campaigning, you're going to have spent that. Yeah, so but when it comes down to member of parliament, we think between 50 and 60 million. Now when it goes down to district, local government.
Give me a sense of how much was probably spent in 2016. Is that the 50 to 60 million for the member of parliament, or is that what is being predicted for 2021?
The members of parliament we have today in the 10th parliament spent on average 500, between 400 and 500 million. And many of them today, if you speak to them, they have at least prepared a war chest of 500 million to start with. That one they have. Because they know that is going to be the bare minimum they're going to have if elections were not going to go down the path of scientific
and then that definitely leads me to my next query, which is around capping spending, because in developed countries they've come up with very fascinating legislation which caps spending, and that definitely creates a sort of a level playing field. And in so doing, a little known Arnold can go up against maybe Mr. Mujuzi here, who maybe is an incumbent in his constituency. And shouldn't this be a wake-up call of sorts, you know, to level the playing field? If there's a cap on spending, and maybe all of us know that we are going in this particular direction, you cannot spend more than 60 million, isn't this something that should just open our eyes to start with?
Very interesting, Arnold. You're raising a very interesting thing, and that's where we have to go. Now, let me say this, that, of course, from the time the Electoral Commission announced that elections are going to be on social media, there's been a flurry of criticisms it's been faced with a flurry of criticisms. But when you look down at what is happening, already in Parliament, I think in February, we remember, Parliament passed electoral amendment bills, which are now on the table of the President, waiting for assent. In those electoral amendment bills, they have introduced provisions to regulate campaign financing. Now, one of the best ways to regulate campaign financing is by introducing caps, because you see, the truth be told, that you see the electoral playing field must be level in order to allow all forms of citizens that have capacity to come up and be able to have a chance to contest. But with the way it is, because of the highly commercialized nature of our elections, there is a group of citizens that have, you know, good qualities that have been technically knocked out of participation. So I think it's about time we did introduce caps. And let me go a little bit further and say this, that one of the best ways to introduce caps is by addressing those things, the triggers for excessive spending. Now, one of the biggest triggers for excessive spending in Uganda has been the contact between candidates and voters.
The electorate, yeah.
Because the electorate, at every single contact with a candidate, they expect what? Money.
But that's where we're going. That's where we're going, because then that leads me to my next question, which would be, elections in the country have become synonymous with handouts.
Yes.
I mean, something as mundane as a bar of soap, or even cut pieces. And this should be something, I'm trying to look forward here, look past 2021.
Absolutely.
This should be something that is stable to our parliamentarians, advocacy groups like yours, to make sure that there's a lesson that we move away with from this. You know, going forward, less handouts, and in so doing, we actually cut down on this huge spending spree that has become synonymous with our elections.
Absolutely. And you see, let me start with from the end. You see, every time the candidates are faced with a situation where they spend a lot and they don't always have this money, they get to become vulnerable to forces that can bankroll them in order for them to capture them when they get into political
Loan
office.
sharks, basically, yes.
Absolutely. But also there are those interests, they could be foreign or otherwise. They capture. So you have a parliament that is generally captured. It is not serving the interests of the citizenry, it is serving the interests of the captor. That captor has bankrolled them into parliament, or local local government, even the presidency now. So I think the time has come for this country to think twice, and we've been advocating for this. We've been pushing for a comprehensive stand-alone law to regulate this, because in the countries where they have successfully managed to curb the negative influence of money on electoral politics, they have legislated. Because when you legislate, then you have a basis of enforcement. Now, we know that in this country there's been this talk where we are renowned or notorious for passing very good laws and not implementing them. The uniqueness of an electoral law is such that even when there is no government institution that is willing to enforce it, the candidates can enforce it between themselves. We have seen candidates, petition in court on voter bribery and other allegations, and people have lost their seats, haven't they? And therefore, we need this law to be in place. This law should be one that promotes transparency, because we need to understand where does that money come from. There must be a provision that requires them to declare. if you are this party that is spending, you know, so lavishly, if you are this candidate that is burning a lot of money, where are you getting it from? Can we get to know? Because you see, as we participate in partaking of that money as voters, we also need to know how are we going to participate in paying it back, and what is our role going to be. Number two, we need to provisions on reporting. You come back and tell us what did you spend on and how much, so that you can know what was the enormity of the task. Number three, can you get to have certain modalities in place, such as requiring the candidates and political parties to have a separate bank account to run campaign money, so that it can be tracked? Because we want to get dirty money out of politics, because it's this dirty money that gets our elected leaders captured by those that bankroll them.
I love where this is going, because then something else that is quite fascinating is hypothetically, if a law of this nature was passed by this parliament, people have figured out a way to hide some of these finances. One is through donations, quote unquote, and the other is things like ambulances. You know, someone says, you know, I'm giving this ambulance to my constituency, and that should not be the duty of a parliamentarian. That should not be the duty of an individual.
Absolutely.
That is the duty of a state.
Yes.
That is where we should be going, because a functional state should be able, with all the districts that we have today, should be able to provide that to the many districts. Now, that is a form of hiding some of these finances through, let's say, an ambulance. Now, is this something that is being proposed in the amendments that we are seeing? Because the reason why I'm asking this is it's very easy to hide some of this money. You can have a cap and say, all parliamentarians, if you're standing, you cannot go above 60 million, right? I would spend 55 million and then give away, let's say, 3 ambulances to my constituency and then get away with it. Do you see where I'm going?
Yes, of course.
Are all these facets being covered, or it's just something as mundane and simple as 50 million is our cap?
You have touched the point. Because you see, the problem we have today is that politicians have re-engineered their roles, okay, and arrogated themselves the responsibility of provisioning of social services. That's why you get them buying ambulances, they're providing food. Some of them are going to small towns and erecting, what are they called, those solar floodlights.
And then they put a huge banner.
They put a huge banner. And so, you see, they're trying to hide something. Because there has been this narrative within the political circles that voters in Uganda do not understand political ideas. Ideas don't matter to our voters. What matters is politics and gifts and donations. And therefore, they have decided to speak the language that voters understand, quote unquote. Now, by so doing, therefore, they have hidden their incompetences into spending and these ambulances they provide, and keep advertising themselves. The truth be told, that you see, I think it's about time we brought our politics back on track, because we are in a different generation. We want to be remembered as those people that put politics back on track, and the one way of doing that is ensuring that the voter gets to understand the characteristics of a leader who doesn't seem to have the competences to serve them better. And one way of doing that, instead of coming and sell you ideas, they decided to blind you with ambulances, school fees, and funerals. They contribute massively on funerals and weddings and so on. So these are some of the things that they need to we need to rethink and bring back. But the only way you can do this is by putting in place a law, a comprehensive law that will define the rules of the game, that would aim at leveling the electoral playing field, so that the conditions for political competition can be equalized, to say the least.
Have you been consulted on some of these amendments that are being tabled today?
We have contributed massively, our ideas massively, to the Sessional Committee on Legal and Parliamentary Affairs when it was scrutinizing the bills that the Attorney General presented. And as a matter of fact, when we read what finally came through as the provisions in those electoral laws, we get to see that our ideas are there and we are on the right track if the president can assent to them. But we are saying that beyond just that, to regulate this the way we should, I think it's important not to scatter these campaign finance provisions on different legislative vehicles, but pull them out, build, enact one stand-alone law, comprehensive law, that will address the context within which we are operating, because there are dynamics at play that are unique to Uganda, that we sit down and say what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, where do we want to go, what way do we want to take our democracy, okay? And to ensure that that in doing this, one of the factors that seem to be undermining electoral integrity in Uganda so much is the over excessive spending. Excessive spending is also a trigger for electoral violence. Excessive spending is everything, okay? So I think the time has come for the country of Uganda to understand that if the Electoral Commission has come and announced that let's go down the path of scientific elections, scientific campaigns, that is one way of starting the journey, because that journey is going to cut down the costs of campaign spending. Hopefully, if we have less spending on campaigns, perhaps we would have better quality leaders in those offices.
How is the Electoral Commission doing on that particular front when it comes to finance monitoring, or is it something that is not really top of their list?
Okay, so the Electoral Commission is on board. They have been flagging it as one of the problems they have faced. The provisions that we saw in the electoral amendment bills came there because the Electoral Commission so suggested. So the Electoral Commission is also in support of a standalone law. The Electoral Commission thinks that one of the best ways we are going to bring sanity and hygiene in Uganda's electoral politics is by regulating the negative influence of money. And so they are on board in terms of legislation. And so some of the measures the Electoral Commission is doing are also applaudable in terms of bringing down the cost. We have seen in the past in some by-elections, the Electoral Commission has stood its ground and said, on this by-election there will be no processions. When you say there is no processions, then you have cut down on spending, because candidates spend a lot on processions. Now they are saying, let's go down the path of campaigns in the media. It means, therefore, that you are going to cut down, again, bring down on the cost of campaigning. To, like we said, if you are standing for MP, which is the biggest acquirable position everybody aspires for, instead of spending 500 million, you are going to spend 50, 60, 70 now. It would be honorable and pleasurable for a member of parliament to also stay with some money in the pockets instead of running around being chased by loan sharks. I think we need to have responsible leaders. The time has come. We need to think twice. There is, as they say in English, that there's always a silver lining on every cloud. Let us look at the silver lining and tap into it.
Every dark cloud, definitely. Definitely have to then cross over to the media side, because this is unprecedented for us. I remember growing up, you see a whole lot of people gathering at a field, and you know there's a lot going on, and it just leaves me wondering now. It's one thing to suggest amendments to an act, you know, or an existing law, and it's another to kind of try and appreciate that all these amendments being suggested for a scientific election need to have an aspect that kind of explores and examines the role of a media in a very, very critical sense. Now, for us to delve into the financing and media campaigns, do you get a sense that the Electoral Commission or an oversight body is really going to scrutinize the media very, very keenly? Because let's say a state-owned enterprise, a state-owned media company, being very free and fair and non-partisan maybe to opposition candidates, are these things that are being critically looked at leading up to 2021? Or is it just something as simple as social media campaigns is what we're going with? We're going with a scientific campaign, radio and TV. Is it that simple, or is there a bit that is scrutinizing very, very keenly the role of the media in this?
I think the role of the media in this, like you signpost it, is going to be very crucial. I think the Electoral Commission must work very closely with the Uganda Communications Commission to put in place standard operating procedures and guidelines. We do know that a bulk of our media is privately owned. We also do know that the state media is not necessarily the most popular. And okay, like now, if you wanted me to place an ad on television, and I want to reach the biggest numbers of the population,
I'm very keen on what you're going to say next. Yeah. I'm very terrified of what you might say next. I think you might skip that part. You might. I thought you were going to make a comparison.
No, I'm not making a comparison. What I'm saying is this: that private media is more popular, whether it is radio, whether it is TV, or newspaper. Okay. So what I think is that the Electoral Commission, working closely with the Uganda Communications Commission, are going to put in place standard guidelines. We do appreciate that some of these private media are owned by politicians. Some of them could be incumbents, and they may want to deny space. But it's important that there are guidelines that regulate this. It is also important that there are guidelines to regulate hate speech. Because normally we have been seeing, especially opposition candidates, would want to build, so capitalize so much on that sense. They call it sensational kind of speech.
Populism of sorts.
Yeah, which is hate speech. So that will be regulated. The point the Electoral Commission has to make is this: that it's important that Ugandans get to start to hear political ideas, okay? Because quite a number of our candidates have not necessarily focused so much on selling political ideas. The thinking is that ideas don't matter to Ugandans, yet ideas do. Now, so I think they should focus more on ideas, because you see, you're not going to go on that radio, or TV or social media and buy your time and spend it on hate speech. The other things I think the Electoral Commission is going to do is to allow people to be creative, because I think one of the things I envisage is that I think they may have to allow the use of megaphones that, with messages. Maybe you have a border mounted with a megaphone, maybe with the pre-recorded messages making rounds on the village parish in the constituency. You might have as many as possible. I am seeing creativity in terms of outdoor advertising. I think those that are in the market for outdoor advertising, it's about time to provide some alternative, cheap ways of advertising, so outdoor advertising, so that these candidates can sell themselves. So I do think that the media is going to play a very significant role in terms of reporting as well. I think there should be guidelines that require this media to be balanced. It's important that state media, even however unpopular it is also gets to be seen to be balanced, but by offering opportunity.
If we're to look at some of the stats, we're looking at 26.7 million subscribers. That's on mobile. 16.9 million internet subscribers, 6.6 million smartphones. This is quite interesting, because if you're going to have if you're to look at the order of the most visited sites in the country, websites, definitely social media and YouTube, they kind of have a huge presence, when it comes to our very youthful population. Now, this leaves me wondering, with an existing tax on over the top kind of subscription to social media, doesn't this just hamper whatever campaign that was supposed to be going on, or awareness campaigns that were supposed to be going on, especially for an electorate that is supposed to hear from political aspirants at this particular time, that contact is out of the picture, there's no handouts per se. Isn't it time to maybe rethink that, or is it well and good?
I think one of the things the government has to think about is to relax that tax on social media, so that as many...
By relax, you mean waive or defer?
Waive, I think, first of all, I don't know how much value it is adding, but of course it is infringing on citizens' right to internet. So I think it's about time government rethought that it's not, it's a bad deal, it's an oppressive tax. You see, and if you have youth who are unemployed, being the constituting majority of the netizens, then you need to make sure that you waive that tax so that you encourage innovation. I think they should think twice about it. But together with that tax, I think the time I foresee a situation where candidates are going to be creative again. They're going to get creative and use SMS texting and voice pops. And I think that's another area that the Uganda Communication Commission has to think about, because you see, allow and not constrain. Because you see, if I am a candidate and I am in an urban, my constituency is urban, I can think about social media. But if my constituency is rural, then I'm going to think about text messaging. And so that I'm able to broadcast, I'm able to map the numbers of voters, because that I can do using my network of voters in the constituency, and then be able to send them messages. I also actually see that there's going to be an excessive use of mobile money, because you see that thinking remains that voters will not vote for you unless you've given them something. Now, if there's going to be no personal contact, then I'm sure they are going to map their constituents, pick their numbers, and they know these things, because there are campaign managers on the ground who have numbers and names. And so I foresee an excessive use of mobile money, trying to induce voters to vote for them. But the other thing is they're going to be using SMS text and vox pops, I think, a lot, to make sure they reach their constituents. So this is an area that the Uganda Communications Commission has to think about. Think about not in terms of constraining, but allowing it to be used so that people can become creative as they work their way around the scientific campaigns that the Electoral Commission has proposed.
Right, Henry, many thanks for making time to speak to us. Let's take a quick breather on that. I'll be coming back to you in just a few. Let's cross over to Stephen Mbide, who is in Tinder, to just give us a sense of what he is seeing at the moment. It is just about 9 minutes past 8 a.m. Arnold Segawa. Just before we cross over to Stephen Mbide, of course, is in Tinder. Mr. Muguzi, just give me a sense of a lot of criticism. I mean, we've already touched this particular issue, but we have a lot of criticism going towards the lack of transparency when it comes to financial spending, not just in Uganda, but Africa as a whole, from Nigeria to Kenya. And it just leaves you wondering whether or not it is time we considered a sort of an open book kind of policy, because we heard a certain member of parliament when they were asked about whether they received the 20 million. They said, I haven't checked my account yet, Hypothetically, if we had an open book kind of policy for all members of parliament, wouldn't that just work in the favor of not only the electorate? You've used the word captured, and I like that word. They've been captured in a way, because if loan sharks are calling you up, hey, where's my money? Where's my money? Definitely you're captured. Give me a sense of what an open book, open accounts, and open transparency, what it would mean for a time like this and going forward past 2021.
Interesting question. Thank you for that one. Because you are touching a real problem we are facing, the problem of lack of transparency in financing this, our electoral politics and politics in general. And because of this lack of transparency, there's been a lot of things ongoing. No wonder in many African countries, when you look at the rankings of Transparency International, we are always ranked among the most corrupt. Now, what would a transparent electoral campaign look like, or politics look like? It would be one that requires that political parties declare the sources of their money and also how they have used it. Now, there is a law in Uganda that requires political parties to do that, the Political Parties and Organizations Act. But this law is neither followed nor enforced, because no political parties don't comply. They don't submit these things. And when they submit them, the Electoral Commission doesn't share them, because the law requires that these should be shared publicly. That the moment political parties submit their returns annually, the Electoral Commission should then announce in the Gazette that these returns have been submitted. Then the public should come and access them. We have written, as my organization, we've written to the Electoral Commission numerous times requesting to access this information. We cannot get it. And of course, when we ask from behind the curtains, we are told the reason we don't get it is because the information is not there. And the biggest offender is the party in power. And therefore, if that was being followed, there would be transparency. Now, fast forward to the candidates. As proposed in the electoral amendment bills, there's that provision that requires that every candidate must declare where are you getting your money from. We are seeing you spend as if money is not a problem on this campaign, granted, but where is it coming from? That is not being declared. And the culture we have here in Uganda is that quite a number of candidates treat electoral campaigns as if they were personal ventures. And so don't ask me, it's my venture. But you see, elections, electoral politics by its nature is a public domain.
Right.
We all have a stake. And therefore, I should know, as your voter, as a citizen, where are you getting this money? This is not your private venture, Mr. or Madam candidate. So I think it's important that we embrace these principles of transparency.
Right.
And of course, supported by the law. There must be a legal framework that requires political parties and the candidates to declare this. Also, utilization, what have you spent it on, so that we're able to tell how much money did you spend on voter inducement. Okay? Because that's the gist of it.
I like the choice of words, voter inducement. Henry Muguzi, many thanks for making time to speak to us. Henry Muguzi is the Executive Director of Alliance for Campaign Finance Monitoring. Just giving us a very insightful conversation. He's still with
NTV.
You're still watching Morning at NTV. I'm Arnold Segawa. 29 minutes to 9 a.m. on the 29th of June. If you haven't gotten yourself a copy of the Daily Monitor, I think you should. The first story on the top is quite hysterical. NRM top officials fail to agree on elections. To delve into that, we do have right next to my left, Yusuf Sarankoma, PhD candidate, a very eloquent debater, if I should say, an avid watcher of NTV, among other things. Obviously, earlier on, we were delving into this conversation. We had touched a few things. To my extreme left, we do have the Executive Director of Alliance for Campaign Finance Monitoring. That's Henry Muguzi. Yusuf, how are you doing? How's the PhD going?
Well, you didn't see the news.
Oh.
I won a case against Mahmoud Mamdani. I should have graduated in 2016. But the celebrity professor at Makerere University, the man called Mahmoud Mamdani, has been sabotaging me for this entire time, and I went to court.
Oh, Jesus.
And I got a good judgment about 2 weeks ago.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
We'll touch that on another occasion. Today it's election day, and yeah, earlier on we're going on about the fact that this whole scientific election, quote unquote, it does have a few perks, a few silver linings here and there. One having to a lot of things around maybe. If we are looking at 50 to maybe 60 million to be spent by MPs, maybe that's a good thing, as opposed to what we've been used to, a few handouts, some soap going here and there, some salt. Just give me a sense of what you make of all of this.
Well, first of all, I think two things. I think the the scientific election is convention for Kampala and for those in the opposition. All right? We're talking scientific election because it will have to be enforced. Like whatever has been spelled out so far will have to be enforced only in Kampala and some of the major cities around this country, all right? But in the countryside, I think nothing is going to happen. Like people will be actually on the streets and will do campaigning because we just don't have the power to enforce it. Forget about whatever this government can promise. We can't enforce it, all right? Then secondly, it's a convention for people in the opposition, all right? If you watched, for example, from all the previous president's directives, from the no distribution of food by members of parliament, only those in the opposition were arrested, all right, for distributing food. So those in the NRM had a field day. If you look at the directive that nobody should come back to the country, all right, if you were friends with government, you would actually come back. If you're rich and friends with government, you actually come back, all right? So the mantra could be phrased poorly. It's like the opposition must comply, and those in power will do as they please. All right, so these directives are not really meant for everybody else. It's typical animal farm business. What is it? All animals are equal, but some are more equal than others. All right, so this conversation took speaking scientific, because if you look at the earlier directives, at that moment when we felt this pandemic is going to kill all of us, right? When we had this sense of an apocalypse coming, it was only the people in the opposition meant to comply. Everybody else was having a field day. It's going to be the same with scientific election. I can guarantee you, Museveni will be on the campaign trail. I can guarantee you that. He'll be out there campaigning. Seriously.
William, I need you to speak to this. The equality of animals vis-a-vis spending. You've alluded to this earlier on when you said that you've asked for the documentation of particular parties from the Electoral Commission, and this is just stalled and stalled and stalled. Does that just affirm where Yusuf is coming from in this particular, I don't want to say inequality, but lack of equality in this particular spectrum?
Well, we do know as Ugandans that we live in an arena of distorted politics. We do know for a fact that there are sacred bulls and sacred cows. But he raises an interesting one, which we look out to see and would want to expose this because we're going to be on the ground monitoring as the domestic election monitors. Yeah, but the idea is that whether you are opposition or ruling party, you should be able to comply. But Ugandans being what they are, you would expect elements of defiance. But I think also what is like I think the Electoral Commission should also come to its senses and accept a strategy such as Kakuyege as we know it, door to door, so that a candidate is able to touch base with the numbers acceptable, maybe 1 or 2 people or 1 or 2 agents doing the door-to-door thing. Yeah, but the open, I look forward actually to see that kind of open air gathering of more than 50, and police just looks at it and they do nothing. We would want to expose this because that would be, not acceptable.
Right. There's a tweet that caught my eye. The U.S. with over 1 million cases is holding rallies, but Uganda with just 800 cases is going to have scientific elections. Yusuf, please take it away.
Just to follow up on this one, there is evidence that the scientific business is for those in the opposition, right? When the chairperson of the Electoral Commission went to speak to the president, who also doubles as a candidate, he reported in an interview with The Observer, he said, we spoke to the president, to Mr. Museveni, as the president, not as the candidate. And so he gave us this guidance as the president, all right? So I guarantee you, under that same cover as the president will be speaking to his compatriots. He'll be visiting bridges, broken bridges. He'll be visiting countryside markets, and in the moment of visiting the country, he'll speak to the Wananchi as the fountain of honor, right? As the father of the country. All right, we use these terminologies, right? So to elevate him beyond his candidacy to just being the president. All right. So there's evidence to it that while everybody was, like they would dress up in yellow, they'd be dressed in yellow, right? The moment you're dressed in yellow, you're beyond reproach. Because the enforcers of the LDs, when you show up in yellow, you actually the state. You employ the LDs who are meant to enforce this. They can't do anything, all right? That straight moving to your question, America has had a...
just before you touch that, you raised something very interesting when it comes to Justice Byabakama and the fact that if he is in this particular office that is not particularly detached, this is someone who's kind of handed his contract by the man in charge, and doesn't it create a particular conflict? And vis-a-vis what you're actually alluding to, the fact that he would have to pay his honors and pay his respect and address the big man as the president in this particular chair, doesn't that create that particular problem as opposed to someone who is maybe given his who gets to sign the dotted line from an institutional kind of approach? I'm just thinking out loud here.
Yeah. So, from the genesis of it, we have a thing called the Independent Electoral Commission, right? When you call it independent...
I feel like there's supposed to be quotes in there. Like
the assumption is that it's independent of power, right? It works outside the dictates of power. And by power, I mean the state and the holders of the state. That's the assumption, all right? And I think this is the facade of our so-called democracy, is that we've given the sitting president, an extreme amount of power, right? Because the one who pays the piper calls the tune. I can't give you a job and then you turn against me, all right? It's as simple as it sounds. The one who pays the piper calls the tune. I gave you the job. I am your boss. Technically, I call the shots. Right, so this is we caught up. It's a constitutional. The Observer cartoonist picked just that bit from the Constitution and pasted it from I think the Parliamentary Act, how the AC is elected. And all the 5 commissioners are appointed by the president. Right? That's like it's a game we play as you know. Then you turn it around and call it the Independent Electoral Commission, right? And as you know, we've been having this conversation. How are EC members elected? You know, I mean, there used to be a Muslim, you know, because you know the president has to be seen as being fair to the Muslim constituency. So there has to be a Muslim. So my friend Hajat Aisha Al-Bega is there as the deputy commissioner, the deputy chair of the, because you know that the president has the electoral as one of those places that he uses to distribute the national cake. All right? Now, that's a facade. When you say, then it has to be the Independent Electoral Commission. Everybody is in there because the president wants them to be there. And then they have to be the adjudicators in this other electoral process going to go through. It's crazy as it sounds, right? But, you know, that's a constitutional crisis we're in right now. Sort of a dilemma we're in right now. You cannot get out of it just by saying, you know, they have to be independent. I saw our opposition MPs, I mean, before we entered COVID-19, they were like going to the Electoral Commission saying, you know, we need to have reforms in the Electoral Commission. And I'm like, if they knew, they'll be asking to reform the entire document that puts the Electoral Commission in place. But that's very, very sort of selfish, some little things. Just
Yusuf, I just want to put a pause on that. I know I'd asked you a question on the US earlier on, but I want to bring Mr. Muguzi in here. What do you say to this? We've talked about reform vis-a-vis the finance side, vis-a-vis the spending side, but give me a sense of what you make of this. If 5 of these top dogs at the electoral body are actually given their work orders from the same person who they're supposed to actually scrutinize, I don't even know how to phrase the question.
You see, when you are in a situation, when you are faced with a situation where you have one party that has been in power for over 3 decades, it is normal. No, it's not normal, but it is common that there is fusion between the state structures and the party structures. And sometimes the person at the helm gets to be seen as the you know, the one who possesses power over everything. Now, if you look at other African countries such as Tanzania, where CCM has been in power for over 3 decades, if you go to South Africa and see ANC, if you go to Zimbabwe and see ZANU-PF, these countries, there is a commonality. So that the one who is in power is basically in charge of everything. Now, when you come back here, you have a president who has been in office for those many years, 33, 34 now. He's been epitomized as the system. And therefore, when he appoints you, you've had people, when people get to be appointed, they don't actually say, we have been appointed, they say, Mzee Ampadde. Mzee has given me. So so if Mzee has given you, then you feel it in you, and you see the Christianity within us as Ugandans. You feel the you are duty bound to do something to reward this person. And therefore, I can hear really when Ugandans have this skepticism about the Independent Electoral. By the way, they have refused to be called Independent Electoral Commission. They are the Electoral Commission. And so the issues of independence still rhyme there. The credibility of the Electoral Commission is still a matter that is subject to debate because of the way it is appointed. And I think until we have come up with a solution to the way we constitute that commission, okay, even if you put a pope there, you know, deep inside him, he will feel that actually I should do something to the appointing authority. And what is the interest of the appointing authority? It is survival. The regime has to survive. The regime must stay. And therefore, when they get to be appointed, wherever you are appointed, one of your major tasks is to ensure the regime survives.
Right.
And how does it survive if you are in the Electoral Commission?
I love 2 things that you touched at the beginning. One is the ANC, South Africa's ANC, which is the African National Congress. The other is Zimbabwe's ZANU-PF. Yusuf, I want you to speak to this. These 2 are synonymous with a revolutionary struggle, an independence struggle, quote unquote. And I love that, Muguzi, you just bring them up here. Give me a sense of if these guys kind of had a struggle. When you listen to the ANC songs, all you hear is struggle songs, the struggle, and this is what we did, and this is how we defeated the apartheid regime. Is this something that is maybe being ingrained into the DNA of the NRM as we see it right now, and ultimately what we are morphing into and trying to believe is an electoral process?
Man, it's quite a stretch to liken ANC to the NRM.
No, I mean the underpinnings of what they're trying to do. Well, NRM is quite young to compare
No,
to the ANC.
they don't. Maybe there could be a couple of things that we can speak to. I'm comfortable comparing Chama cha Mapinduzi to ANC, and you know, I mean, scholars have argued that maybe the people, the forerunners of these parties, were the genius in it. Julius Nyerere here,
Mwalimu
Nyerere said, okay, we're going to hand over to the next, you know, regime crop of leaders, and I think Nelson Mandela did the same. All right, so there's a marked difference there that in these two cases, the forerunners, those who are seen as the fathers of these revolutions, actually,
or Tambo, yeah.
so they handed over to the younger crop of leaders, and so they moved. So they created a tradition of changing from inside, right? So they've been able to stay in power, but they have this sort of change of leadership, all right? And the ways in which they play the politics is really different because of just setting a tradition, all right? So you can compare Mugabe's ZANU-PF to our NRM, that the man on top has never thought about living. So the best example that comes really close is like RPF. So there's a sort of common. If you think about it really critically, you can see that there's a new regime of what you could call technocratic autocrats, right? They govern through the technocracy of democracy. You can think about those men, and you can actually plot a pattern, right? From those who hold elections and win those elections, they never leave, right? Kagame down south, you can talk about Museveni, you can talk about Mugabe who just left office, Omar Bashir, you can talk about Mubarak. All those men who lived in the 1980s and onwards, they sustained, they reproduced their autocracy through democracy, right? It's a very interesting thing to think about. So you can only draw parallels between Mugabe and Museveni, Kagame and Museveni, Mubarak and Museveni, Bashir and Museveni, right? So that's the kind of power play we have in this country. And you know, if you look at the ways in which those autocrats have left their offices, you can say Uganda is not an exception to this, right? So you can say Mubarak, Mugabe, Bashir, Kabila. Mention any of those names, they live through electoral processes, all right?
Mr. Muguzi, before I let you go, I just give me your parting shots. Very fascinating quote the man, the candidate has given us, reproducing autocracy through democracy. Just give me a sense, your parting words before I let you go.
I think when you look at there's something we need to address here. The reason countries conduct elections is to better their democracy. It doesn't seem to be the case in Uganda. I think we do elections to be seen to be doing elections because I think regimes now in Africa have learned that it pays and it is important for you to have international legitimacy. And one way of obtaining this, achieving this, is through elections. But these elections must be controlled in a way and manner that you always come up on top. And once you reinforce extend your stay in power through elections, then you become, you know, unchallengeable. And so I think it's about time we started viewing and using elections as a way of bettering our democracy instead of using it as a way of sustaining of political survival. These are some of the things we need to understand. And to do this, I think it's important that we allow, for instance, political parties to function the way they should. Because one other political distortion we have in Uganda is that you have political parties that are not organically connected with the people they serve. I'll give you an example. You have something called Farmers' Party. You remember it had a candidate, but there was no farmer. It could not relate with any farmer, but it is Farmers' Party. And so we need political parties to organically connect with the views and aspirations of the citizens on the ground, okay? And we do so by allowing parties to operate, to mobilize, and so on. So I think we need to rethink. You know, we need to have a degree of political tolerance, which is critical for democracy, right, so that we can have elections that are democratic. But for now, I don't think we have democratic elections. I think we have elections. We always keep having elections, not democratic elections.
Henry, many thanks for that. Yusuf, very briefly before I let you go, there's a philosopher who once remarked that having sailors have comments on the ship is as bad as almost letting them steer the ship. I'm paraphrasing his quote here, but you've made some interesting comparisons. Very, very briefly, just give me a sense of whether or not this has become an event to reassure Bretton Woods institutions and the State Department that, hey guys, you know, we actually do have elections here, or it actually stands for something.
You know, the thing that Henry spoke about, the idea of legitimacy. I mean, in African countries, I think after structured adjustment, we don't hold elections for the natives. Elections are held for legitimacy. All right, this is why you find a country such as Somalia, which will be there will be a push for stability. Maybe Al Shabaab should be talking with the sitting government, right? Villa Somalia, Al Shabaab should talk, but that country also has to go through an election. All right, the idea is that the only way you can guarantee, because we survive on grants and loans, the only way African governments can get loans is if they claim to have the mandate of the people. All right, so we hold elections across the African continent to get the legitimacy for loans and grants. All right, so that you borrow on behalf of the people. And the only ways in which the borrowers know you have the money is going through an election. All right, so this is the kind of sort of crisis we're caught in, is that this is the moment we're in, is that elections are not for us. This is why you find when Mnangagwa won, like kicked out Mugabe, he had to organize an election immediately so that he can get the legitimacy, not for the Zimbabweans, but for the legitimacy so that he can get funds. All right. So you find very small countries that were really speaking language of stability and ways of like interparty coalitions so that they can build the country together. They're caught up in this mess of organizing elections just simply to get the legitimacy of the world, not for the service of their compatriots.
Right, Yusuf, many thanks for making time to speak to us. Right to my left is Yusuf Serankumba. He's a PhD candidate. And to my extreme left, Henry Muguzi, who's Executive Director of Alliance for Campaign Finance Monitoring. That's where we leave it for this edition of Morning at NTV. It's just 8 minutes to 9 a.m. I'll be back at 1 p.m. with NTV at 1. For now, have a good morning.